And with that, we welcome you into 49ers Live. Joe Fann, Taylor Price, our special guest, Ted Robinson, the voice of the 49ers, joining us to break it all down. We just heard for Jed York just south of 30 minutes. Let's get your guys' initial take right off the bat. Taylor, let's start with you, then we'll jump over to Ted.
Well, normally I don't cut off the voice of the 49ers, but let's just go with reestablishing championship culture. That was the phrase that pays. That was the one that Jed York said often and throughout. He pointed to building that connection between the GM and the head coach, and hopefully that will set forth a new championship culture here.
Yeah. Guys, thanks. It's nice to be with you. I thought Jed was very candid up front and said about all you can say, which was that this was an embarrassing season. When you walk in the lobby of 49-49 across the street and you see 5 Lombardi trophies, 2-14 isn't acceptable, hasn't been all year. And beyond that, there isn't really much, as I'm listening, that Jed can say today. I mean, this was the day that you're knocking the building down. There's not a whole lot you say. The day when you really can say something is when you're building it back up. There were a couple of very sharp questions asked to Jed about the structure and the process going forward. And, he indicated, I think it doesn't sound like a whole lot's going to change. There isn't going to be a major domo hired, it doesn't sound, listening to Jed today, who's going to run football and then put everybody else in place. It sounds like they're going to hire 2 people for the jobs on a parallel course and expect, as the Harbaugh-Balke marriage, and that's what I'm remembering, guys, I don't know if you are, but the 2011 hiring of Harbaugh, Trent was already on board but hadn't quite been officially anointed GM. And when Jim was hired, it was to put the 2 of them together in a marriage. And it worked for a short period of time. I have a feeling that's where Jed seems to be heading now.
We're finishing this press conference here on 49ers Live as the 49ers close a 2-14 season. Yesterday, a loss to the Seattle Seahawks in Week 17. Following the game, the rumors were abound with the reports coming Saturday night. Nothing officially came until a few hours following the game, but we were in the locker room last night speaking with some of the players, their reaction to this season, and the reports out there. Here's some of the sound from the 49ers locker room.
Us as players, we just have to, remember our place, and that's, being players and just working on the field and doing those things. Everything else we can't handle. So just try to let the ownership and things like that fold out.
Trent Baalke is the one who drafted you. Is it going to be strange not to have him as a general manager?
It is. Me and Trent's had a great relationship throughout the 7 years I've been in the league. He's cared about me as a person, not just as a football player. So it's deeper than this. Sad to see him leave, but I wish him, the best as he continues to do his GM job.
We had the same coach twice at all since I've been in the league, but it's always tough when anybody would lose their job. Man, they haven't announced anything yet, and I pray that's not the case. I know how it feels to be fired. Chip's a great coach. Trent's great. Just to see how they move forward.
The situation we're in is unfortunate and it's frustrating. So, that's just my whole thoughts on it. You go through the whole entire season. Obviously, this is not the kind of season we want to have here. I saw reports of Trent being let go. So things are going to be different, obviously, next year. So just kind of move forward and, we obviously know that things got to change around here, and they are, and so whatever changes come about, you just got to put yourself in the best position going forward as far as what you can do, what you can bring to the football team, and you kind of prove yourself to whoever's here again.
Oh, you're never as bad as you think you are, and you're never as good as you think you are. So I trust the decision makers to do what they need to do, and I'll just worry about getting myself ready if there's another season in my future.
Some candor from the 49ers locker room, and you saw that same candor from the CEO today, Jed York, in his press conference, meeting with the media for about 28 minutes, answering a number of questions, some very difficult. And Ted, you alluded to it. There's nothing that he's going to be able to say at this point that's going to satisfy the angry faithful, the media who want answers. But you can appreciate him coming up and apologizing, using the word embarrassed, and taking ownership of it.
Yeah, there were 2 things, Joe, to play off on that I thought came up from this. He admitted this season was embarrassing, and it was. And this season was the defense was historically bad. Franchise lows, and these are just statistics, so it's not opinion here. This is fact. Franchise lows in several defensive categories. Yesterday was like a gut punch. You had Seattle playing the game at the end like it was the fourth preseason game, and you can't stop them in the last 6 minutes of the game to get yourself one more shot to try to win the game. That was reflective of the whole season. And so there was a question asked that made a comment that I found incredulous, which said this was a 5-11 team that had arguably less talent in this year. And I'm not sure what planet that's coming from, but this was a 5-11 team that added 2 first-round draft picks that started, that had Carlos Hyde much healthier. Carlos barely played last year. That had Antoine Bethea healthy. Antoine only played, 5 or 6 games last year. Now there were losses. Bowman was hurt, etc. We know it's always going to be balanced by injuries. But it's impossible for me to sit there and say this team was less talented than last year, yet the results were dramatically less. Second point I would make quickly is that Jed was asked, and I thought it was a very good question, about championship culture. Define it. And he kind of he stayed, I think, in a macro view of it. Joe Staley, in our radio pregame show yesterday, was really ready and gave about a 9-minute explanation of what he believes championship culture is. And I thought it was fabulous. And Joe talked about the players. He didn't point fingers at anybody else, but he said we need more leaders, including myself. We need more football guys that are 100% in. We need players who understand that just because you were drafted in a certain place, you're not owed anything, that you earn it, you don't get it. And that, he said, that has to start here. This locker room has to change. And I thought that was exactly the answer that I'm sure the person asking Jed that question was hoping that Jed was going to give. Joe gave it. And Joe has the position to give it as a 10-year player here. And I thought it was a brilliant answer and a summary of what this team, the phrase that we all use is the word edge. I think we'd see this team didn't have the edge that it had in its winning seasons. And I think Joe was articulating that to me in this interview was, this is what we need. We need to get a little bit of that edge back.
If you have some questions for Ted or Taylor, be sure to ask them on Periscope, and we'll get to a couple of them. Taylor, Jed alluded a little bit to the process and what it's going to look like over the next couple of weeks. The NFL schedule in the postseason makes that a little bit challenging. We've seen names from the Kansas City Chiefs, the New England Patriots, those teams obviously in the postseason. And so there's going to be a time and place for all these interviews, but who knows when these hirings are going to come. We also don't know whether it will be the head coach first or the general manager, but what we do know is that they not necessarily have to have a professional relationship, but an understanding of one another, a mutual respect, and be able to share philosophy.
Yeah, that was fascinating because you might go the GM first, you might go the coach first, and Jed York said, let's be flexible on this. Let's find the right two that work well together. They'll communicate, and that was something he constantly pointed out in this press conference. He wants the GM and the coach to be communicating throughout the year, and ultimately he expressed frustration with Trent Baalke and Chip Kelly at the midway point of the season. Things weren't going right. They didn't have answers on how they could get this team moving forward. He expected that marriage to work out, and it didn't happen. So right now the key is on great communication between the GM and the coach. No matter who gets the job first, they have to work well together, have experience, and a comfort level working together.
Clean slate is what he used. And I thought that was an interesting question. We say, well, what makes this job one that somebody would want when you're selling this position? Because there are other openings around the NFL, all these very coveted positions. There's only 32 in the world. But for guys who have options, say a Josh McDaniels, his name will be thrown around a lot. How do you sell the 49ers franchise when you've had two or three coaches, 3 separate years? And then he said, well, we got a clean slate. And that was what he went back to. You're going to have an opportunity with a clean slate, with someone you work well together with, to create that championship culture. What was your response when you're listening to that?
That was another good question. I think that's an obvious one that everyone wants to know is how do you sell that? Stability, everyone wants. If you think about it, we're talking about the coaching turnover, but the general manager position had been stable. Trent Baalke ran 7 drafts for this franchise. He hired the last 2 coaches. I think the Jim Harbaugh hire was more of a collaborative one, but Trent hired the last 2 coaches. So there was stability in that position, and the results just haven't been there. Hence that change. Now we're all listening today trying to understand, okay, what's this process going to be about hiring, and do you go the route that other teams have when they've hired a successful, credible coach? When you look at, and obviously Belichick has the rings to do this, but you even look at what Jeff Fisher, who just got let go with the Rams. Jeff Fisher was pretty much calling the shots for the Rams, and they had a general manager in place. Sean Payton pretty much been calling the shots for the Saints with a general manager in place. That is a possible model. And if you go hire someone, and you mentioned the name Josh McDaniels, clearly he's going to be one of the most attractive candidates to the multiple teams out there. If you hire Josh McDaniels, maybe he has someone that he knows from New England that he's already worked with, that he's comfortable with, and they come in and work this thing together, like Pete Carroll and John Schneider, by the way, right?
Yeah.
Like now you have Atlanta, where Dimitroff and Scott Pioli is there. And they've done a magnificent job, even through a coaching change to Dan Quinn, of running that and being stable on that side of the business while they change coaches. So I understand the question. I thought it was a very good one. And I'm not saying, I guess what I'm saying is if Jed made it, I thought he made it clear that he's not going to hire that almighty, powerful deity to run football. Absent that, then it appears to be this is the route where you're going to, who's the best guy out there? Is this the best coach? And if so, all right, how do we plug in the GM alongside that works best with him?
Again, I don't know if I was expecting how candid he was when talking about the marriage between Trent Baalke and Chip Kelly, saying it just didn't work. Maybe I should have seen it. Admitting that. You obviously can't play revisionist history. He said that multiple times. But when you look at Trent Baalke and his defensive background and Chip Kelly and the offensive background and why that didn't work and why it's so necessary to get it right this time in terms of that relationship. One more note that I took that I thought was really interesting. Tom Gamble, who was brought here before the season, thought maybe if Trent Baalke is to go, there's a turnkey response, and Tom Gamble is ready to step in, knowing the scouting department, knowing the front office. It didn't really sound like that would be the case, Taylor. He did, obviously, incredible accolades for him, calling him one of the unsung heroes of the scouting world, but maybe less about him and more of, we just need a fresh start here.
That's what it sounds like, and no other coach or personnel member has been let go. They're able to pursue other opportunities. That's what Jed York made clear today. And you want to look to a fresh, open mind in this perspective and lean on your experience. And it's an unfortunate thing that the 49ers have been in this position. But Jed York, Parag Marate, they have met with many of these candidates that will be available. They've had previous interview opportunities with them, Josh McDaniels being one of them. So it'll be interesting to see how much they tap into those experiences. Do they follow up with people they've met with in the past that they liked for potential positions, or do they open up the clean slate? There's a lot of names out there, and it'll be fascinating to see because they're totally interested in going in a new direction.
Again, used the word embarrassed multiple times, said we owe our fans more than what we've given them. Let's move on to some of the candidates, and there's already reports circulating for both the general manager position and the head coach. Let's look at some of the tweets floating out there. Here's Albert Breer, Chris Ballard from Kansas City, a popular name. Josh McDaniels again. As we continue to roll through these, what's your response when you see some of these names thrown out there that have been this so far? Only less than 24 hours into it, there's already 5+ names at the general manager position, 5+ names at head coaching position.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious. And I do think this goes back, Taylor and Joe, to one question that was asked during the press conference, which is about the information getting out Saturday night. And as uncomfortable as that is, and there's no denying it, it's uncomfortable for everybody. This one, to me, was different because this has been known for weeks that this was a possible, if not likely, outcome. And so you've had agents, and we all understand agents are basically paid to be vultures. That's their job, and they've been vulturing around this franchise for a better part of a month because they're trying to promote their candidates for the possibility, then potential openings. Where that, I guess when I look back and I say, all right, what would have been the motivation for the 49ers to have leaked out on Saturday night that you're letting your GM and your coach go? That there's not a whole lot of motivation in that. The lesson you take away is that the only real clean dismissal I've seen in my time here has been Mike Singletary. And that's what several teams did. Gus Bradley fired at the end of a game this year in Jacksonville. Fisher was let go right after a game, or the day after a game, I guess, in Los Angeles. Unpleasant. Holidays intervened, but it was the cleanest way to go. The candidates are, I think, the normal ones. You also have a very strong Rooney Rule in the National Football League, so you're going to have people like Anthony Lynn was interviewed here last season for the job. He's clearly got a shot at the Buffalo position after finishing the season. So you have to make sure that's in play here, as well as in the general manager spot, where you have very talented people from all walks who have been holding those kind of personnel positions. The funny part is that in the GM world in football, we don't have this automatic list. I don't think those names that we just put up there, how many fans would know who any of those people are, right? I don't know half of them, right?
Yeah.
The coaching candidates are different. I think we all know the coaching candidates. The GM candidates, it's sort of where baseball's gone in the analytics push as well. It's a lot of people who've worked behind the scenes in very studious ways, but we don't know them. They didn't play, they didn't coach, they don't have that public profile.
Taylor, we heard some of these names last year, Anthony Lynn being one of them. Josh McDaniels has been a head coach before. Like Ted said, these are guys, we know where they are, we know where they've been. So how much do you look forward to kind of continuing this train over the next couple of weeks and seeing what names ride? We went through this last year and finally landing on Chip Kelly. There's excitement there and a new page, a new chapter for the 49ers organization.
Yeah, and I think really what we have to look forward to is the connections. And because Jed York wants these two figures to be so connected, you have to see who's worked with who is comfortable, has background with the other man. So you could throw out a coach here, but if he's not connected to a GM, you have to find the two connections that make the most sense. And a lot of experience interviewing these top candidates. Hopefully, if it's a coach first, they have a personnel man that they trust and they want to work with, and I think that would seal the marriage.
Ted, Tyler has a question and wants to know if McDaniels would be a good hire as we continue to discuss these candidates that have started to circulate on social media.
Sure. Well, I mean, McDaniels, it's hard to fathom that someone who has spent as much time as he has in two separate stints with Belichick, with Brady, with other strong assistant coaches around, hasn't matured after his first experience in Denver, which we know didn't go well, didn't end well, but that hasn't matured him to where he would be a viable candidate. And I continue, guys, I beat my little drum here. Every franchise has an identity, and this franchise's identity is offense. And I understand defense is necessary to win. It was an essential component of the 3 straight NFC championship teams a few years back. But the identity of this franchise is offense. If you walk down the street in downtown Santa Clara and said to anybody, hey, name the 10 greatest 49er players, probably going to have Ronnie and a good shot at there being 9 offensive guys, right? So I think that has to be, and I thought that was what had me optimistic about Chip Kelly coming on board was the resurrection of offense. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. The quarterback position is a complete blank slate here. You talk about clean slate to me. I will have to say, I mentioned this on the radio broadcast yesterday at the end of the game when I watched Colin Kaepernick walk across to the shield and shake hands with Russell Wilson, first handshake. And I said, 3 years ago, we thought this was a decade. We thought this would be a decade of matchups, head-to-head. Russell Wilson against Colin Kaepernick in a defining rivalry in the NFC West. And I personally think yesterday was the last game Colin Kaepernick plays as a 49er. And that is amazing to think that what we thought was going to be a decade-long defining rivalry has unfortunately devolved. And Colin, if he plays football next year, is likely going to be playing somewhere else. I would have never envisioned that we would have said that.
Ted, and that's a nice segue because when you look at what are these guys? Yeah, we got to find the right candidates, but then once those candidates are in place, what are they adopting? What kind of roster are they taking on? Sure. The salary cap, $40 million, moving over to next year. There's going to be money to spend. You have a second overall pick. You have DeForest Buckner, who played well last year. You have a quarterback situation, like you alluded to, where is it going to be Colin Kaepernick? You say no. They're going to have an opportunity to make a decision on that. And so there's that freedom in terms of cap space, draft picks, young talent. Does that make this more of an ideal scenario for a new GM and head coach?
Well, I think so, and especially if you're talking about a McDaniels and you understand that he's just spent several years working with Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's a name that's going to be out there this offseason. Kirk Cousins is a name. Washington fell yesterday, didn't make the playoffs. So Kirk Cousins has a possibility to be out there. And to me, the 49ers have a situation where they need to address multiple quarterbacks right now. They can make decisions on whether they want Blaine Gabbert to come back and Christian Ponder, who we didn't see play, unfortunately, at all this year, to come back and see if they want to be a shot. But you need to address multiple positions. And I'll be honest, I thought this year a major flaw was that this franchise did not have a quarterback on the practice squad this year. I don't understand that. In the position that this team has been in, that you needed to have at least one quarterback that you're holding and developing. May not work, but somebody that you have on your practice squad to say, I'm going to give him a year or two of reps to see if that's a potential person. That, going forward, has to change in my view. And that you want to have 3 quarterbacks coming here next year via free agency, via draft, and then via undrafted players. And have at least one that you're holding back on your practice squad and say, well, find out in a couple years if there's something there.
Taylor, we spent so much time last night talking about it, and we went on a quick video just kind of previewing what today, how everything would unfold. And while there's obviously reports of your discussion of stability or coaches in 4 years, for the list I just ran down, there's also a number of reasons why this would be an ideal job for both candidates.
Yeah, and I would look at salary cap space and that number 2 overall draft selection. You have a chance to get a premier blue chip young cornerstone of this franchise right off the bat at the number 2 pick. Now, if the Browns, they would have handled their business, we might have gone the first overall pick, but you're going to get a clear-cut blue chip player, and that is a great asset for a new GM, a new coaching staff to mold their identity of what they want to do with the 49ers. And you talked about quarterbacks, you talk about defensive linemen potentially being high up there at the top of this year's draft. The 49ers are right there in position to find a clear-cut difference maker. And we haven't had so many impact players in the last few years brought into this team. You could potentially get one in free agency with all that salary cap space and then follow up with another impact player at number 2.
Good stuff, Ted. Obviously, we appreciate your time so much. And just as we kind of close down our first show of 2017 here on 49ers Live.
It is New Year's Day today.
Exactly.
Today.
It is New Year's Day. Kind of an empty office building, the company holiday, corporate holiday around America. But we're here, and we're discussing what's going to be a really big month for this team. And so I have 2 questions left for you. First off, and I want both of you guys to touch on this, what do you look forward in this scenario when it is such a clean slate and so much unknown, both at the GM and head coach positions? What do you look forward to over the next couple of weeks, Ted?
Well, I look forward to seeing if there is one of these prominent candidates, and there's always a possibility it could be somebody that we're not familiar with. There could be someone that gets the buzz through the football grapevine that is interviewed and winds up blowing people away. I've seen this happen in plenty of sports and plenty of other places. So, but let's just assume it's going to be one of the premier candidates. Somebody's going to take the challenge on here because this is a historic franchise. And as we saw with Jim Harbaugh, who, by the way, had no prior connection to this franchise, had no prior connection to any of the greats of this franchise, other than a brief dalliance with Bill Walsh when he went to Stanford. But my point being that when Jim Harbaugh came here and they won, and this franchise won, you found out you're a hero. And so I hold out hope that one of the premier candidates is going to feel the same way. He's going to look at this historic franchise, understand that there has been no indication that there's any holdback here, that you have every resource and tool you need. There is going to be a complete clean start in football ops. You have draft picks, you have plenty of cap space, and that somebody will take that challenge on. And the second thing I think will be to see how this franchise operates in free agency. And we know that. It hasn't been a big player in free agency. And I mentioned this again yesterday with Tim Ryan because we're talking about the leadership thing and getting a person in here. And everyone in the last decade around the San Francisco 49ers holds up one guy as the paragon, right, of leadership, Justin Smith. 49ers signed him as a free agent.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't draft him. He was somebody else's pick. And this franchise went out and made an incredibly smart decision about a decade ago to go get him in free agency. Are you going to try to do the same thing and add some veteran leadership that this locker room badly needs?
Yeah, hard to follow that one up. They famously took Justin Smith around town with the helicopter ride. Yeah. So who's the next free agent to get the tour of the Bay Area? And for me, I really look at Jed York and his role in this. He took some lumps there at the podium, and a guy who really wants the 49ers to be back in the good graces of the NFL, successful, competing for Super Bowls. You could tell this means a lot to Jed York. He really wants this bad. And he said it, I own this football team. You don't dismiss owners. That's the quote that everyone was tweeting after this game. He knows that the pressure is on. The eyeballs are on him, and he wants nothing more than to make this right. And so I'm fascinated to see Jed York's role going forward, what he says, who he speaks with, and how this all plays out from the ownership down. He's consulting former 49ers. He has people in the league looking out for him in this move. What did Jed York do? That's what we're all looking at.
For me, it's what does this marriage look like, right? Jed York said over and over again, there has to be a familiarity with each other, whether it's first, they've worked together or just respect each other. They share philosophies, but how entrenched do those ties go? Because there's some out there, you have reports, Schefter tweets, Josh McDaniels is a head coaching candidate, but you have Pat's director of pro personnel, Nick Caserio, for the general manager jobs, guys who have worked together in 2 separate stints now very closely. And so is it that tight, or is it more of a loose where I've admired what this guy's done from afar? So I'm curious when those names do come to fruition, when we finally know who's going to be the next general manager of the San Francisco 49ers, who's going to be the next head coach of the 49ers. Okay, well, let's look back at the history. Why does this work? Why will this be a marriage that is successful in 2017 and beyond? My last question for you two is, it was a 2-14 season. We've turned the page. 2017 now, onward and upward. I want the best thing you saw in 2016. Obviously, a season wins and loss wise, eliminated from playoff contention by the midway point. But whatever that name is or that storyline is that you say, you know what, I'm going to look back on that season with that fond memory. Taylor, I'll let you lead off.
I'm going to go with Carlos Hyde. And this was a player that had high expectations. Going in as a second-round draft pick, he has big shoes to fill. Frank Gore is going to be talked about long after he retires because people respect what Frank Gore did as a 49er, and that's not easy to follow up in his footsteps. But Carlos Hyde was healthy for the majority of the season. He did have a shoulder injury. He finished with a knee sprain. But we saw some explosive plays. 193 yards in one game this year is something that the 49ers could build on going forward. You know you have a bell cow running back, a guy who can do some spread concepts, can do some power concepts. This is a running back that any talent evaluator would want to have on their team. And there's not too many players that the 49ers could say, can this player start on your team? Carlos Hyde, I feel like, can start on any team in the NFL.
Yeah, it's hard, and that's a good one, Taylor, because I would say that was a real uplifting thing was the way Carlos came back and ran after his injury. The second half of the season gave, I think, the 49ers hope that this can be their bell cow back. Although I'll say it right here, and I'm going to say it again, since the season's over and their season is over, I would love nothing more. My wish list for 2017, I want Frank Gore back as a 49er. I think that would be a phenomenal. You talk about adding a veteran, leadership and respect in that locker room, that the people who played here with him adore, worship him, and by the way, ran for 1,000 yards. Still has something left. Yeah. And if I could have, my first wish list would be to have Frank Gore back here next year alongside Carlos Hyde in the backfield. Best thing I saw this year, Joe, was the reaction on the field at the end of the Rams game. With in a completely lost season in a totally, kind of an atmosphere-less stadium at the end of that game. And there are the players pumping Chip Kelly up to go for 2. The players kind of jumping on the victory pile when Rashard Robinson intercepts the pass. And then Chip Kelly's reaction. And I give Chip Kelly a ton of credit. Chip Kelly handled a lot of stuff this year very well with a great deal of class, including his final podium yesterday afternoon. And Chip Kelly, and we all understand the personal loss he suffered a month ago and how tough that is. He had a lot of stuff thrown at him this year, and he handled it extremely well. He's very stoic. That's the New England in him. And to see him react when the 49ers made the 2-point play in L.A. to take the lead. This is the pile-up on Rashard Robinson. And this was just, that doesn't look like a team that was 2-13, right? When you see guys react that way. I thought that was pretty cool. This is something. And then Chip Kelly's fist pump about 2 minutes prior to that. You never saw Chip Kelly show that kind of. I've never seen him show that kind of emotion on the sideline. Yeah, I thought that was it's only a snapshot in the midst of what was really a dark season. We're grasping, admittedly, for something positive to think of. That'll be mine.
I'm going to take DeForest Buckner. 6 sacks, 73 tackles. This guy never left the field. Came back from a foot injury that thought maybe he might be out a couple of weeks. Only missed 1 game. He reached the benchmarks that he set for himself before the season. I loved what number 99 did, and I think when you look back on this season and the 7th overall pick and the expectations that come with that, you expect that you're getting a cornerstone of your defense. And I think that's exactly what the 49ers have. Sure, ups and downs, and there's areas for improvement. But I don't think you can look at DeForest Buckner as anything other than an incredible bright spot in an otherwise very difficult and challenging season.
Iron Man.
Iron Man.
Yeah, that's true. And you look, and I was talking to some of the Seattle people yesterday about this because really the only comparable player is Calais Campbell in Arizona. No one else has played that position at the size that Buckner is except for Calais Campbell. And Calais Campbell's had a heck of a 10-year run. Yeah. And I think that would be a great comp. If DeForest Buckner can come through and play 9 more years like this and give this franchise a 10-year run like Campbell's given the Cardinals, that'd be a heck of a pick.
So much to come over the next 7 months. There is no offseason in the NFL. A new head coach on their way. A new general manager on their way. The 2nd overall pick in the 2017 NFL Draft belongs to your San Francisco 49ers, and we'll have you covered throughout all of it. Ted, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you joining us. Happy New Year to you.
Same to you guys, Taylor and Joe.
To
more smiles this year, we promise.
That'd be good.
For Ted Robinson, for Taylor Price, I'm Joe Fann. Happy New Year to you. We'll see you real soon right here on 49ers Live.